We are witnessing the beginning stages of the cataclysmic meltdown that will occur among the elite political and economic class in the United States if Bernie Sanders wins a majority of the delegates in the Democratic primary.
This thing is going very well for Vladimir Putin.
And then you have this shameless class of neocons, lifelong right-wing Republicans, so-called conservative pundits who refer to themselves as never-Trumpers. They have been in this wild, weird alliance with the MSNBC DNC crowd in the Trump era. And now they are offering their totally unsolicited and unwanted, panic-addled advice for what Democrats should do and how urgent it is to stop Bernie Sanders.
Calling Democratic members of Congress, governors, and other leaders, could you perhaps say in public what you say in private, that a Sanders nomination would be a disaster for the party?
Trump could very easily win re-election, especially if Bernie Sanders is the Democratic nominee.
Trump critic David Frum puts it more directly. Bernie can't win.
I'm sorry, but Bill Kristol, Max Boot, David Frum, and all these other neocons have no standing whatsoever to pretend to tell the working people in this country, people who fight for economic, racial, gender justice against wars of aggression, who to support for the Democratic nomination.
As a United States Senator, I do understand the power of the corporate elite and the 1%. They have literally unlimited amounts of money. They have significant control over the media, over our economy, and over the political life of this country.
See, Bernie Sanders has been in opposition his entire career. He's run for election repeatedly and taken on major corporate and political forces. Bernie Sanders has been vetted. The campaign of Hillary Clinton spent substantial resources on so-called opposition research and produced absolutely nothing that could effectively tar Bernie Sanders. One of the wealthiest people on earth, Michael Bloomberg, is spending mega millions right now trying to smear Bernie Sanders. And it's a bit ironic and frankly nuts that Bloomberg, with all of his heinous, well-documented skeletons walking around out in public, that he pretends to be the veteran-in-chief of Bernie Sanders? Here's the fact. If there was any real dirt, I mean consequential facts on Bernie Sanders, it would have already been weaponized and deployed. And so what do we have now? Red baiting. This was entirely predictable. In fact, it was definitely part of Hillary Clinton's attacks on Bernie Sanders back in 2016.
He praised what he called the revolution of values in Cuba.
And now here we are in 2020, and once again, red baiting is emerging as the central tactic that is being used by Democratic Party elites and by Michael Bloomberg and Joe Biden, and yes, by Republicans and Donald Trump. This is the central strategy of the bipartisan coalition trying to stop Bernie Sanders: McCarthyism.
That literacy program that he was talking about was a re-education program.
This is as bad as you know who's saying they were good people on both sides. Yeah. It's the same thing.
Why are we talking about Cuba and its literacy programs? Is it because Bernie Sanders is running around talking about it? No, we are discussing it because that is what McCarthyite corporate power wants to discuss. And they're doing it in a dishonest, out-of-context way in an effort to smear Bernie Sanders. The truth is that these attacks on Bernie Sanders about Cuba, Nicaragua, Latin America, Sanders' statements in the 1970s saying he wanted to abolish the CIA, these are meant to distract, and they are pathetic attacks. But if that's the debate that these people insist on having, then let's have a real, honest debate about the murderous U.S. policies that Bernie Sanders was opposing. Let's talk about Fulgencio Batista's vicious dictatorship in Cuba that was backed by the wealthy power elite in the United States government and in the private sector. That was the government that Fidel Castro overthrew. And it is indisputable that the Cuban Revolution brought healthcare, housing, literacy, education to a country that for decades had been a U.S. plantation with a bunch of casinos on it. Let's talk about the vile U.S.-backed Contra death squads in Nicaragua and its campaign of terror, rape, pillage, all of it supported by the Reagan administration. Let's talk about the coups and assassinations and support for dictators and brutal thugs orchestrated by the U.S. government for decades. Bernie Sanders came of age in an era where the CIA was being revealed as a criminal enterprise, overthrowing governments, backing death squads, actively spying on American citizens inside the United States, assassinating people. And Sanders had the courage in real time to oppose it when it mattered.
If you trace the history of the United States vis-a-vis Latin America and Central America, there has never been a time when a country made a revolution for the poor people where it was not overthrown by the CIA or the United States government or the Marines.
You see, these cherry-picking, ahistorical, red-baiting attacks on Sanders that we're seeing from Bloomberg and Buttigieg and Biden and never-Trumpers and certain Democratic elites and media figures, it's propaganda. It's rooted in lies, and it's banking on ignorance of history. It is aimed at making voters scared of the Red Menace, and it's an effort to try to prosecute Bernie Sanders in front of their modern-day House Un-American Activities Committee.
Are you a member of the Communist Party? Or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party?
Many of the dishonest scaremongering attacks are being made by people who never say a word against U.S.-backed dictators, despots, or death squads. For the most part, these forces are happy to get in bed with dictators and human rights abusers if it fits their political, or in the case of Michael Bloomberg, financial interests. Michael Bloomberg, not too long ago, was yucking it up in a Starbucks with Mohammed bin Salman, a mass murderer, a tyrant who kills journalists. Bloomberg makes a ton of money doing business with the Chinese Communist Party. Joe Biden was a key player in the start of the genocidal bombing campaign that Saudi Arabia has been conducting against Yemen. Let's not even talk about their positions on Israel. Here is the major difference between those attacking Sanders and Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders has consistently opposed U.S. hegemony. That's why they attack him. These people don't care about human rights unless it fits their agenda. If you actually listen to what Bernie Sanders has said about left-wing governments, he constantly offers nuance. He calls out authoritarianism and anti-democratic policies.
I happen to believe in democracy, not authoritarianism. But, you can't say China is another example, all right? China is an authoritarian country, becoming more and more authoritarian. But can anyone deny, the facts are clear, that they have taken more people out of extreme poverty than any country in history. Do I get criticized because I say that? That's the truth.
Now, I don't endorse political candidates, and I do not think that Bernie Sanders is some sort of political savior. I have my disagreements with some of Sanders' record and policies. And by the way, there are a lot of leftists in this country who believe that Bernie Sanders is being too harsh in his condemnations of Cuba, or are opposed to Sanders' positions on, say, drone strikes or some U.S. wars. Bernie Sanders is not a revolutionary socialist. He's a democratic socialist. And with all that said, Bernie Sanders has proven himself, particularly since 2016, to be a great vehicle for change, certainly within the constraints and corruption of the U.S. electoral system. And he's done it by lifting up the movements and people and communities who have been doing this work far longer than Bernie Sanders has been running for president. And that's the key.
Who is the only candidate to call to break up ICE and CBP? Senator Bernie Sanders. That matters. All of this matters.
Bernie Sanders is an imperfect messenger for sure, but he has done the work, kept focus, and inspired so many people across racial, economic, gender, and ethnic lines to fight for something bigger than themselves. Remember that when you watch the desperate smears against him. Remember that what they are trying to stop has nothing to do with Fidel Castro or the Sandinistas. This is about stopping the masses of people in this country who are sick and tired of a system based on oppression and rooted in defense of a system where the rich and powerful rule all of our lives.